Over the years, riding the American dream has been an ideal and then a reality that has consumed my life. The roads, the bikes, the characters and the lifestyle have all ingrained themselves on my soul, and I can't wait to return, this time to ride virtually the entire length of the country's east coast along the legendary highway US Route 1, stretching from Boston in the north to America's southernmost point in Key West, Florida. On its 2,000-mile journey south, Route 1 takes in a staggering 12 states and links some of the country's most famous cities, embracing a huge diversity of cultures and traditions that have made this fascinating country what it is today. So the question is, will riding Route 1 be one of America's greatest motorcycle rides, or will the East Coast's frenetic pace, urban sprawl, stifling traffic and extremes of weather conspire to prove that this could be a ride too far? Either way, time will tell, but my adventure starts here in the enchanting city of Boston. Well, welcome to Boston and welcome to hopefully the start of another amazing ride. Now actually Route 1 never started in Boston at all. It actually starts about 500 miles north in Portland, Maine. But for us, Boston is going to be the start from where we head south, and I'll tell you why. Well, it's simple. If you're coming over here to ride Route 1, Boston is the closest city to fly to, or you'd have to cross the Canadian border, which is a logistical nightmare. So best, I think, to take the simple option and start right here. And where better than Boston's biggest bike shop to pick up my steed. But before I set off, best as always to get some advice from manager Mike. Is it going to be a ride of a lifetime?
It will be a ride of a lifetime. You're catching it at the right time of year, though. You won't have to deal with much weather outside of rain, so no snow or sleet or anything like that. But
oh, wait, there's going to be rain?
There might be rain.
How would you sum up the East Coast? Just in attitude, perhaps riding, the kind of people?
It's a hardcore rider out this way. You know, the roads are tougher, the traffic can be tougher, so you got to be on your toes. And it's the rider out here is they're hardcore, that's for sure.
And what about New York? Do I need to worry?
Watch out for the potholes. They can eat you alive. And watch out for some of the cars. You have to be aggressive out here.
So how about this for aggressive? This is one of the most radical custom chops on the market today. It's a Saxon Crown, built in Bean Eater and emission-free Arizona, brimming with urban attitude and so loud it seems to set off car alarms wherever I go. The bike is not for the faint-hearted. Wafer-thin seat, minimal suspension, no front mudguard and fishtail exhaust pipes that are already cooking my right leg. But I don't care. For me it embodies what the East Coast is all about. Raucous, dangerous, idiosyncratic and ultimately in your face. But before we head south aboard this monstrous slice of East Coast attitude, perhaps it's worth heading back into Boston and briefly explore this delightful city. Now if I was utterly honest with you, I didn't actually know what Boston was famous for, and more embarrassingly, I actually didn't know that it was the home to Harvard University. So this is where they all come from, the preppy and the privileged, the new generation of senators, scientists and captains of industry. And what an environment to learn the rudiments of global corporate policies. Stunning architecture surrounding tranquil rivers steeped in history and conservatism. The perfect place to plan a theoretical merger or pen your first thesis on the global reliance on branded sportswear. Boston immediately demands respect from the rank and file like me. I feel somewhat meek amongst the world's elite in waiting. Denise has lived here all her life and she knows a thing or two about Boston's reputation.
This is a academic, historical, cultural destination. You know, in the South they have their own history, they have their own culture. Certainly out on the West Coast, I think they're a little more laid back. They probably think we're uptight. But we like to discuss things. We probably spend a lot of time discussing things. And in fact, this area code, the zip code is 02138. And 02138 is known as the most opinionated zip code in the United States.
It's that long-standing tradition of discourse and argument that has shaped this city and in the 1770s even led to the demise of the British occupation and the War of Independence. Needless to say, Boston was at the centre of the initial discontent that heralded a new freedom for America, mainly from us limeys. Chris has been peddling this dubious history for years to any tourist that's willing to listen. Chris, if I'd known I'd dressed up, mate. Really, you know, I love the outfit. So that's in period, really, is it?
This is period, 1700s, yes, 1750s to 1790s.
the whole kind of getting rid of us lot started here, did it?
It did, because here you had more of a stronghold, more of a stranglehold in the Boston area. Pretty much we had our own governmental system set up, and we paid taxes to our local government. We had our own officials that we elected, and then there was the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War. And that bankrupted England. And of course King George had to find another place to find money. So that's when we had to start paying our taxes directly over to England. But we weren't getting anything
in return.
Money. Exactly.
Absolutely. It's the same feeling as one gets actually living in England these days. It's amazing that we're still friends, but I guess time heals.
Time does heal.
Oh well, guess it's best to head out of town before Chris dusts off his musket. So we're heading out of Boston south on the 1, with the 130 miles to the stunning coastal retreat of Mystic ahead of us. But with the traffic heavy and an ominous sign above the freeway, Mike, the bike shop manager's advice is ringing in my ears. My experience of riding America has mainly been on the West Coast, and here I can immediately sense a real difference. The drivers seem to be filled with purpose, and time, or the lack of it, seems to be their ultimate frustration. There's no doubt that I'm going to have to be on the ball constantly to avoid becoming a statistic, and I haven't even got close to New York yet. As the sun starts to set and the temperature drops, at least the traffic is relenting, but my Howard Stern of motorcycles is doing what all celebs do best, already having a hissy fit. So somewhat dejected in the dying embers of our first day, I arrive at our hotel in Mystic with a list of problems. There's a petrol leak on it, there's a misfire on it, but the clutch is fried, and now it won't start. Not the best end to a day, I have to tell you. Next morning reveals the whitewash, featherboard-clad facade of the Tabor Inn in the centre of Mystic, my digs for last night, complete with tasteful floral decorations, both inside and out. But its New England charm is of no interest right now, as this beast is naturally my main concern. Well, I'm mystified in Mystic. It's not really a very auspicious start. We've done 100 miles of some 1,500 or 2,000 miles. And it's not very well. I'm terrified about going into New York, both with a misfire and a clutch that doesn't work properly. I just can't find neutral. Now, a lot of other bike shows, they have huge support network. We don't. I've got a spanner and a mobile phone, but I found a bike shop just down the road. So the only hope is that it does start. That's the key to success. Well, wonders never cease, so better beetle off quick to the chop shop before it stops. As I ride through Mystic, two things come to mind. Firstly, somewhere last night we crossed the state line into Connecticut from Massachusetts. And secondly, how utterly lovely Mystic is. Supposedly it was made famous as the location for the Julia Roberts movie Mystic Pizza, but as an old biker there's absolutely no chance of me having ever seen that. Soon though, I arrive at my potential saviours. At Mike's famous bike shop, the heavenly help comes in the form of Beano.
Beano, you need to come look at this.
Let's just hope the mighty Beano can get my baby back on the road.
What do we got?
Getting the bike onto the ramp, it becomes pretty obvious to Beano's well-trained eye that these are just minor problems, and we can, as they say in France, frapper la roue in no time at all. I really thought that, I was going to have a nightmare. So basically, right, the misfire, they reckon, is down to the HT leads shorting out on the engine. Hopefully we can sort out the play in the clutch, which again should just be sort of a glitch that you get with a new bike. Do you know what never ceases to amaze me, okay, is I ride across America, up America, around America. Everybody is here to help you. If you've got a problem, I mean, we've just ridden straight in. In England, you'd be waiting in a queue for about 4 hours, and then they'd say, "Oh, we haven't got the part."
You're all set.
Oh, you're amazing. So with renewed enthusiasm and huge gratitude to Beano, I clamber aboard the beast to head back into Mystic. So far the misfire seems to have vanished and the clutch is fab, so I can relax and soak up the joys of this pretty seaside town. Mystic imbues what Connecticut is all about. Round every corner, the staunchly protected maritime history and nautical lineage of the community's forefathers, lovingly restored and cherished, is a joy to behold. Mystic Seaport is predominantly a recreation of a 19th century seaside village, but it's still the most wonderful embodiment of this cultural legacy, and Mike's been preserving the woodwork of this coastal wonderland for years.
Well, Mystic Seaport was established in 1929 as a way to preserve the area's maritime experience. Really, our belief is that anybody is connected to the water, and one way or another, when you come here, you're going to figure out what your connection is.
The East Coast seems to be, everyone seems to be incredibly proud of their history and lineage, is that right?
Wouldn't you? Look at the place. Look what we've got to brag about. You know, we're an interesting lot. There's some really strong personalities around here. Sure, you get the crusty old New Englander, but that same crusty old New Englander is going to tell you stories until, you know, you're sick of hearing them, because we've got them to tell, and we're really proud of them. We're not going to tell it unless we think it's interesting, because we don't like to spend a lot of our time doing unnecessary things.
Well, I get that, you know, sort of West Coast, everyone spends a lot of time doing unnecessary things. But East Coast, you really kind of cut to the chase pretty quick.
Well, there's no reason not to. I mean, just like it is what it is. Get it done, get in, get out. You know, don't waste your time, because if I'm wasting my time with you, it means I'm not doing something else.
Well, okay, I get it. Well, I've got to get to New York pretty quick before the rain comes, so I'll see you later, Mike.
All right.
Well, rain is actually an understatement. The reality is that there's every chance that we could now meet a tropical storm that's heading this way. I'm not happy, okay? The bike's running an awful lot better, but there is this tropical storm that's coming, and they say that it's going to hit this area at about 12 o'clock tonight, but we're actually heading down into it to New York. So my worst nightmare could come true, that we're hitting New York in rush hour in the pouring rain. To me, that's not a great motorcycle ride. As I leave the small town security of Mystic to get back on Route 1 and start the 100 miles or so down into both the dangers and delights of the Big Apple, I'm filled with anticipation. On the one hand, I've been dreaming of this ride aboard a serious chopper cruising the iconic streets of New York, and on the other, I'm now nervous of both the potential weather, the rush hour traffic and the horrendous road surface. And with about 40 miles to go into Manhattan, the traffic, as expected, starts to thicken, and as I arrive in the Bronx, I get my first taste of New York's infamous potholes. But as I ride into this great city, the unfolding scenery seems so familiar, thanks to the countless movies and music promos that have served to globally promote and observe real life in this harsh urban landscape. I do feel like the millions before me entering the city, that New York is the centre of the Western world. With its manic, often unforgiving and uncompromising character, this city thrills and terrifies in equal measure. It seems that these streets are no place for the meek. As night starts to fall, and with fortunately no sign of rain, I ride into Manhattan and eventually make it through the mayhem to our hotel just off Times Square. Well, we've made it, and that is the most important thing. I have to say, today has been a nightmare. And if you're thinking of doing a world's greatest motorcycle ride like me, Boston to New York certainly isn't that. I have to tell you, the traffic is intense, and if the traffic doesn't get you, well, the potholes could do. So the only good news is the bike's behaving and the storm hasn't come. But I tell you what, if you're not experienced, the chances of getting here alive are pretty small. I'm exhausted from the concentration required on this roller coaster ride in, and it takes me a few minutes to become acclimatised to the surreal world I've suddenly transported myself to. Perhaps it's best to get some sleep before immersing myself any further. Next morning, and the rain has finally arrived, but luckily for me, I wasn't planning to ride anywhere today, but just explore New York on foot. Well, my God, we were lucky last night to get in here before the rain. Literally half an hour we got here and the rain came down. But this morning, it looks pretty bad and it looks set in. But I have to say, rain or shine, New York is a mad place. The rain-soaked streets only serve to highlight the oppressive feel that for me is all-pervading and synonymous with Manhattan. The intensity of this city is overwhelming, with the millions of New Yorkers and tourists like me scuttling through the streets to a destination that's much more important than their current surroundings. But before I face the busy streets, might be good to first address the age-old problem in the city of accommodation.
So, well, where to stay in New York? Well, my experience of New York hotels over the years has been pretty lousy, but you can find some wonderful boutique hotels that really embody what this city is all about.
New York hotels have inherently been overpriced, cramped and run down, but contemporary boutique hotels like the Grace, a few hundred yards from Times Square, are the new breed of cutting-edge, minimalist, vibey establishments that are slowly springing up around town to cash in on the discerning tourist who craves a cool and quirky environment, complete with its own pool and reception. The rooms, as you would expect, are ultra-modern and exceptionally trendy, but as always, the inflated prices haven't changed. This room is yours for a staggering $400 a night, not including the condoms and massage oils that are oddly for sale behind the check-in, items that perhaps sum up New York's insatiable appetite for the controversial and subversive. But as the rain relents slightly, time to venture out and explore.
You know, one thing's for sure about New York. If it's anything to do with modern-day world, whether it's financial, fashion, food, anything, whatever happens here, we're all going to know about it.
Walking these streets, you can't help but feel the buzz of what's next, of who's next, the buzz of out with the old and in with the new, even if the old was rather nice. They say everything can change in a New York minute, and they're right. To walk these streets and soak up this feeling is a must, but to shop in one of the world's greatest stores is of course an option.
Well, New York obviously is all about shopping, and on a day like today, it's probably best to keep it under one roof.
And in the world-famous department store that is Bloomingdale's, there's supposedly no need to venture anywhere else. This store actually spans a whole block, filled with a vast array of the latest fashions and the coolest designer labels. Marion makes it her daily duty to assist you in spending your hard-earned cash.
Bloomingdale's is supposed to be the third biggest tourist attraction.
That's correct, it is.
Why is that?
I think what's so great about Bloomingdale's is that the mix of the product in the store, we really have something for everyone. So whether it be an incredible contemporary sportswear area in men's or women's, whether it be a great children's department or a fabulous home furnishings area, and an amazing cosmetics floor, which we're in the midst of right now, there's really something for everyone here at Bloomingdale's. And I think that really is what differentiates us from the competition and makes us such a tourist destination in New York City.
That may well be the case, but for me, I have to be honest, I was seriously underwhelmed by Bloomingdale's. I was expecting magnificent one-off displays of lavish products and hugely individual items for me to swoon over, scrabbling to get my phone out to take a picky. Instead, I was confronted with rail upon rail of designer clothes displayed on floor upon floor of soulless and seemingly endless departments. I just got the feeling that I'd seen it all before, and anything that truly reflected Bloomingdale's own personality was almost impossible to find. Outside, my experience in the store has only served to darken my mood. Personally, I believe that this is a young person's city, a city where friendships and relationships are as transient as the next designer label, a city that promises the naive and punishes the weak. It's a place where everyone is confusing activity with progress, with no real understanding what happiness there is in progress.
And the bottom line is New York, I find, perhaps it's just because I'm getting older, is incredibly oppressive and frenetic, and really all I want to do is just get out on my bike and avoid the rap music and be on my way.
But I do feel I'd kick myself if I rode out of town without sampling the nightlife, as this city is one of the world's truly 24-hour destinations. I've been spending the day in Midtown with its teeming streets and bleak austere tower blocks for company, so perhaps spending the evening away from this homage to commercialism may rejuvenate the soul. Now, when I think of New York, I think of bagels, I think of Broadway, I think of Times Square. I also think about the mafia, and here in Little Italy is really where it all began. This area, sandwiched between Chinatown and Soho, does a huge amount to cheer my mood. Gone are the tower blocks and impersonal facades. In Little Italy, the real-life communities of New York go about their business. It seems that everyone for once has a name, and also a past and a tradition that brings the population together. It's a past steeped in mythology, with stories of mafia bosses huddled around white cloth-clad tables, discussing their latest victim's downfall. Allegedly, Umberto's Clam House was one of their favourite haunts and is still doing great business today, and owner Robert has survived to tell the tale. For me, there's all kinds of things synonymous with New York, but the mafia is one of them. Here is sort of relatively famous for that.
This is where I was born. I mean, those novels, The Godfather and Donnie Brasco and stuff, that were born on these streets right here.
What you see in the movies is actually the reality. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's shots, famous shots in movies of Midtown where there's thousands of people, at lunchtime just moving through the streets. And if you go up there, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon in Midtown, you're going to see it. You're going to see that energy. People doing business at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, like it's a normal business day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. What you see in the movies is what actually happens here.
The multitude of movies and TV dramas that have carved these images in pop culture are all part and parcel of New York's legacy today. But does the fictional portrayal of relationships in shows like Sex and the City paint the real picture as well? Fortunately, my mate Lucy has just moved here a few weeks ago. She's free and single in the Big Apple, hanging out at cool bars like Pastis here in the meatpacking district, and the perfect person to enlighten me.
So you've been here for, what, 3 weeks?
3 weeks.
And what's it like?
I love it.
Why do you love it?
Because it's crazy, and it's exciting, and anything goes, and everybody here is mad and interesting, and I feel like the energy in this city is like nothing else in the world.
And are people, as direct when you go out on a date as they are in business here?
Oh, yes!
Are they really?
But the games they play are less direct. It's fascinating. Oh yeah, the games are beyond. So while they may be direct in asking you, once they ask you and you go on the date, the rules kick in. And the rules are very complicated, and I haven't quite understood them yet. But I gather that you cannot call them for at least 24 to 48 hours later. When you do call, you're not allowed to be available. So you have to then be very aloof and not interested. And then you have to sort of be interested, but not too interested that you look desperate. I'm telling you, it's a nightmare.
They think the grass is greener?
The grass is always greener in this city. Oh, there's always some better-looking person that's just walking the bar. And as a woman, you have to sort of adjust your way of thinking in that respect.
It really is Sex and the City, really.
It really is Sex and the City. And I thought that was a huge Hollywood cliche, but actually, I think it really is.
I'm thrilled for Lucy that the New York dating scene works for her. For me, I think it's pretty obvious. If I was looking for love in this city at my age and on my budget, I'd end up an alcoholic. Next morning, though, the rain has relented and I'm reunited with my high-maintenance relationship.
Well, it's amazing the difference a day makes. So this morning, it's murky, but it's what they call a drying track. So we're leaving New York and heading out about 85 miles to Philadelphia. As I head out of New York, I suddenly become aware that since I've arrived here, I haven't seen another biker, probably because they've all been killed. At last, my imprisonment in New York is at an end. I feel free again and where I belong, looking after my needs rather than being cajoled by everyone to pander to my wants. The mayhem of New York's choked-up streets already seem a vague memory, and I can concentrate on the constant threat of a shower. But as always, with the bike's tiny petrol tank, my need for gas is insatiable. Well, getting out of New York, that wasn't too bad. There was a little bit of spray, but nothing too much. Thanks. One thing that is a problem in New York, you can't park a bike. So with a little bit of bribery and corruption, we managed to. But anyway, we're out to feel a lot better. Now we're out of the big city. And it was pretty easy. So let's just hope the rain holds off and we'll be all right.
Well, the rain does hold off with only the slightest of sprinklings as I enter my 4th state of the ride into Pennsylvania. But as I cross the famous road bridge into Philly, the city limits herald the return of my bike's dreaded misfire. I've now got this feeling that this could be a very long love-hate relationship with this radical chop. Perhaps I've just picked the wrong bike, like my choice of women, for all the wrong reasons. Basically, it's killer looks. Just hope things will improve, and I really hope I can fix up this bike. I mean, it is running a whole lot better, but still, for a brand new bike that I actually own, it really shouldn't be in this state. But at least I'm mainly dry, and I'm here in Philly, a place, strangely, I've always wanted to visit. Ever since Philadelphia's mayor, Ed Rendell, brought the city up by its bootstraps in the 90s, it's become a burgeoning metropolis with its eyes firmly on modernity, but it does have a fascinating history.
Now, one of the weirdest tourist attractions here in Philly is this place. It's the Eastern State Penitentiary, and it was the first prison in the world to practice the fine art of penitence.
Penitence was the somewhat flawed premise that prison could change criminal minds if they were locked up on their own, rather than being thrown into one melting pot of violence and disease that was prison life in the 18th century, and that the inmates, through years of solitude, could realise the ugliness of their crimes and would become genuinely penitent, hence the name penitentiary, and the concept started here when the prison opened its doors in 1829. So Nick, what was this whole principle of penitence?
Well, it started very early on. There was always Quaker presence in Philadelphia, and they were trying to reform the way prisons were run. I mean, they were filthy, disease-ridden, overcrowded. People were coming out worse than they went in. So this group of people decided, let's change the way it's done. Let's make a system where, well, essentially, you get to reform someone rather than just punish them. And that's where this whole idea of solitary confinement and labor in a cell for the entire sentence came out of. This solitary system became known as the Pennsylvania system. It took off fairly well in Europe, but it had so many problems. Well, one of the things clearly that it was psychologically damaging to keep someone alone for that long. It's interesting today, the supermax prisons in the United States are the almost exact copy, and they're running into the same problems. So it's interesting that they're running into those problems that they discovered here almost 180 years ago.
But the Eastern State Penitentiary was also groundbreaking in its layout, a format that was then copied the world over.
Well, the layout was one of the reasons it became world famous, this radial plan. This young British architect, John Haviland, he comes here and he thinks if we have one center security hub from which all of the cell blocks radiate out, you know, before they have surveillance cameras, so it's one way to have one guy be able to survey the whole prison.
America seems to have an enduring love affair with sending people to jail. It's staggering that there are some 25 million inmates in US prisons today. In the UK, there's 86,000, and America is only second to China in having the world's largest incarcerated population. But if you bribe the right people, prison life could always be made a little easier.
Well, one of the most famous cells in the whole penitentiary is this one. And this is where Al Capone first spent a time in prison. He spent 8 months in here for being caught with a concealed handgun. And he was allowed sort of waltzes to be played that are like playing now, and he was allowed his wife to visit and all that kind of stuff. But I reckon he had it pretty cushy.
As I head off across Philly, the legacy of its reinvention in the 90s is all around. Modern tower blocks, clean and friendly streets all combine to give this city an air of safety and prosperity. I'm heading across town to meet a man who's credited, often by himself, with another of the city's great inventions, the Philly cheesesteak. Gino's Steakhouse and Pat's across the street are the two takeaways who've invented a way of eating thinly sliced beef in a bun that has now become famous the world over. Gino's is easy to find, just follow the queue for lunch. Well, there's no mistaking Gino's Steakhouse, is there? He ain't very popular. Well, if I can barge my way to the front of the throng, perhaps I can find Joey Vento, the godfather of Gino's and its legendary cheesesteaks. Joe, right in here, and there's a queue down the street. What's that all about?
Oh, that's it. That's a line of people for Gino's cheesesteak. That's what it's all about. The city of Philadelphia is known for their cheesesteaks. like to be able to say I helped make it famous, you know. And then anywhere in the world you go, if you say Philadelphia, they see either Gino's, Joey Bento, or cheesesteak.
So there's Pat's cheesesteaks over
Yes.
there, and there's you guys here. So is there? There's obviously rivalry going on here.
Oh, definitely.
Is the history?
But see, I look at it, it's like a mind over matter thing. I don't mind, he don't matter. To give the man credit, he invented the steak sandwich. I'll give him that. All I did was come along and perfect it. They keep saying, you know, he's the king of steak. Well, how did I get so big, him being the king? See, here there's no democracy in Gino Steaks. It's a dictatorship. It's my way or the highway. In fact, I think right now, I represent Philadelphia. You see my place at night with the neons. I think if I closed the lights down, they wouldn't be able to find Philadelphia from the airline.
Joey started his business in 1966 with $6, and now he's a multi-millionaire. His rags to riches story perhaps epitomises the American dream. Today people come to Gino's from all over the world, and it's easy to see why.
Well, this is what all the fuss is about, and it's so simple. A Philly cheesesteak, a bit of onions, beautiful steak, and a bit of cheese. Now I'll tell you what, really, these taste amazing. I've reviewed quite a few restaurants around the world, and I've sat there and eulogised about the food, but this is really, really good. Do you know what? I do feel this trip is now beginning to happen. Up to New York, I really felt, well, is this a great motorcycle ride? Well, perhaps it is. Now we're here in Philadelphia, we're going to head out to Washington, and then after Washington we get into the Carolinas and all that kind of stuff, and we get to rural America, and that's what I'm really looking forward to. But before we get to true rural America, we've still got about another 100 miles to Washington, and leaving Philly south on the 1, I get the feeling I'm experiencing the Philly I'm not supposed to see. The centre of this city may be a shining example of what corporate investment and a zero tolerance to crime can do, but these suburbs still have a neglect and a community swept under the carpet feel to them. The ride also has its own problems, mainly trying to avoid getting stuck in the tram lines that run all the way down the 1 out of town. I've got to realise more than ever on this trip that emotions should be kept in the present, as the future right now has a habit of constantly disappointing. As the evening blanket of grey continues, I arrive at a faceless hotel in Chadds Ford, some 30 miles south of Philly, praying for something to be chuffed about in the morning. I really thought at the end of yesterday things would improve. It was dry, we left Philadelphia, and now we've woken up to this, really, a rather austere hotel in the gloom. Now, there's other problems as well with the motorbike. I think it's been built on a Friday night, basically, this thing. Just coming in here to Chadds Ford, my speedo collapsed. So that don't work anymore. It's still misfiring slightly, so we've got to get it sorted. Now the weather's supposed to improve tonight, so I'm just praying that life will improve. But it ain't going to anytime soon, because the rain has finally caught up with me, so I'm togging up to face the worst. As I head out following a small dry line on Route 1, I'm chastising myself that I ever thought this part of the ride from Boston to Washington would ever be fun, and why did I ever plan to ride this route in the autumn? Well, the answer is actually that it may be wet, but it's lovely and warm, and also the weather should be perfect down in the Carolinas and beyond. But just as I'm cheering up, I come off the 1 and leave my dry line, and suddenly I experience what a front wheel does to you in the rain without a mudguard. It's as if someone is just pointing a showerhead at your face. What a perfect compliment to the day's proceedings. Well, one thing I found out, at least with this bike, with no front mudguard, bring your own rainstorm with you. So we're here at one of the curiosities along Route 1. Well, if there's one thing I love, it's legacies left by some of the world's eccentrics, and this little museum is a gem.
Nestled in the suburbs of Chadds Ford, this tiny little museum is dedicated to the barking mad life of one Christian C. Sanderson. The man was one of life's hoarders and committed himself to a career during the 1900s of procuring the weirdest things. Things like a piece of President Lincoln's coffin, shells from famous battles like Gettysburg, hundreds of autographs from now dead presidents, and thousands of other fascinating bits and bobs no one else would ever dream of collecting. Fortunately, this fascinating museum was set up in 1967 to display the crazy artifacts Christian collected, and the utterly delightful Mr. Thompson was one of the founders. He must have been very well connected, was he, or not?
He had a lot of friends and contacts, and people were sending him things. For example, some of the melted ice from the South Pole. He's got a bottle of melted ice from the South Pole, and so he had these friends knowing that he would want these things. The interesting thing is he made many notes on Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. He died on the anniversary of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address.
It's a testament to Mr. Thompson and his totally dedicated team, who are now eyeing up another useless artefact that they can gladly put in the museum, that this adorable attraction is available for us to visit. Do yourself a favour and take them up on the invitation. Well, just down the road from the museum is this little town called Kennett Square. Now, it's not really famous for a whole load, but what it is for me is it's the holy grail. After 4 days of being in the urban sprawl, I really do feel now there really is a sense of freedom. And the freedom is the ability to at last get a taste of small-town America, with its leafy thoroughfares and quaint little coffee shops, imbuing a slower and more civilised pace to life. And to top it off on my wander, I've also stumbled across one of the weirdest tourist attractions. Well, I was wrong, okay. Kennett Square is famous for something. This whole region produces 60% of America's mushrooms. The guys in the shop asked me whether I'd like to check out the mushroom farm down the road. So seeing as it's raining yet again, why not? The owner might be a fun guy to be with. Well, what an unbelievable surprise there is in store. This is one of the biggest mushroom farms in America, with over 1 million square feet of growing space. This place is like being transported into a sci-fi B-movie, walking down the corridors of a corroding, damp, abandoned spaceship, with weird beings growing out of the walls. What an odd feeling to experience when I haven't even imbibed in the other type of mushroom. Jim is the pilot of this crazy trip.
Commercial mushroom cultivation in the United States started in Kennett Square. We're the self-proclaimed mushroom capital of the world. We still have the largest concentration of growers anywhere in the country, so they live right here in Kennett. Back in 1970, within about 25 miles of Kennett Square, there were over 300 different mushroom farms. Today, there's only about 80, but they tend to be larger. So there's really no climatic, natural resource reason why it's here. It just started here, and as it started to grow, it just mushroomed. So right now we grow 9 different varieties: portobello, cremini, shiitake, oyster, maitake, pom-pom, orange, enoki, and beech.
Suffice it to say, Jim and his fellow space cadets grow basically all the specialist and exotic mushrooms you could possibly wish for. They grow in these huge hangars under minimal light and being constantly blanketed in a warm mist of water, rather like I'm going to be on my way to Chesapeake Bay. Out on the one heading to Chesapeake, tonight's stopover before Washington, it's all really gone horribly wrong. The rain is lashing down, and to make things even worse than just the plume of water from the front wheel hitting me straight in the face, I've now realised that having only half a rear mudguard allows another fountain of water to soak my back. The result, I guess, of buying a bike that was designed and test-ridden in the deserts of Arizona. But there's always the benefit of having a tank that only does 75 miles. You can always seek brief solace in a gas station. Well, they said it would clear up by 4, but they were wrong as always. That was pretty miserable, I have to say. But hopefully it may get better. This is a very difficult ride, and there's a lot of oil on the road. But you never know, it might just improve. At least it isn't cold. That's one saving grace. But apart from that, life is pretty miserable, even though I'm supposedly riding the American dream.
it still feels a nightmare. But one must live in hope.
And hope is in fact fortunately just round the corner. The rain is starting to clear and I think I might have had a breakthrough in my bike's continual misfire, something that's been getting progressively worse in the torrential rain.
Do you know what? I think I might have found the problem. It's funny how life works out, isn't it? We start off depressed and rainy, and now we've got a lovely evening. And check this out, I actually think all the bike's problems stem from that, which was hanging off my ignition key. So basically what's been happening is that that's been wiggling and it's been shorting out against the ignition box, or it's been pulling the key which is in the ignition to make it intermittent. All in all, since I've taken this off, this bike is amazing.
Well, I may be premature in my excitement, but now as I'm treated to my first real sunset, I arrive shaken, but certainly not stirred at my B&B for the evening, glad that today has finally decided to call it a night. Morning reveals a glorious new state, the state of Maryland, and we're south now of what they call the Mason-Dixon line, a line that was drawn to delineate the divide between the Yankees in the north and the Confederates in the south. I'm filled with renewed enthusiasm and passion for the ride, so much so I've even decided to give the beast a wash.
Well, you know what? This morning I've woken up to bright blue skies in Maryland, and I've got this feeling that we're probably, hopefully, out of the worst. Now we're out of the urban sprawl. We're going to go to Washington in a minute, just a little bit there, but then the route down to Florida is much more sparsely populated, and I hope that we're going to get what we've come for, really. Now in Maryland, if you want to stay out in the countryside, this is a typical and glorious B&B.
The Butterfly Fields B&B is a treat, complete with beautifully appointed wooden panelled rooms and a real family feel. It's also surrounded by its own stunning countryside, complete with a full complement of livestock, and it's all yours for about $60 a night. But as ever, always onward and back down the dirt track to ride only some 30 miles into the capital. Maryland's countryside is a joy to be a part of, with its traditional white picket fences and featherboard houses nestling in mile upon mile of lush green woodland and rolling acres. It's hot, probably in the 80s, and it all smells divine, an experience you never really appreciate in your air-conditioned SUV. I could ride through Maryland forever, but soon the suburbs of Washington slowly engulf me, and it's only when I see Capitol Hill ahead I realise that my passion for riding America's rural roads will hopefully very briefly be interrupted. Washington DC, or District of Columbia, is, as we all know, the capital of this great country, but it's also home to the World Bank, the IMF, embassies from all over the world, and a huge amount of corporate and political types in their dark suits, or others making sure they're seen out jogging by their peers, who are also sweating their way through their lunch break. You get the feeling wandering around these hugely impressive memorials to fallen heroes in the gloriously vast manicured grounds that this is as close as you'll get to really what's going on here. On first impressions, it's all just so. Probably, I guess, how the capital should be.
But actually, you don't have to look too far to find just a little bit of humour.
Hey, how you doing? George Bush. I want to welcome you to Washington, CD. Of course, sex, lies, obstruction of justice, and that's just Dick Cheney.
This is John, one of the best-known George Bush impersonators, a man whose cash flow seems to have now come to an abrupt end. John runs the scandal tours round the city, and it's refreshing to meet someone more cynical than me.
They actually do need a sense of humor here because the hypocrisy is very high here. We've got both sides of the, the government, the Democrats and Republicans who are all on the take, and of course, we have sex scandals. Every square inch of Washington is, we have a scandal. In fact, George Washington, who was the father of the country, he wasn't really a father because he shot blanks. He was sterile So why they built that monument in that shape, I guess we'll never know. Another thing is interesting that a lot of people don't realize is they always say 9/11, 9/11 was when terrorism, the first attack, but actually the first attack came from you guys, the British, who burned the White House down.
Did we?
You did. You went in there, and there was a meal planned, a victory meal, which we didn't win that battle. The British just sat down, and instead of cleaning the plates up, you just burned it.
Did we?
Yeah, that's first official act of terrorism. Remember, America is the original home of the losers, right? I mean, the losers from England founded America, right? So we're all the losers, man.
What does that make Australia?
Criminals.
Admittedly, I've only spent a morning here, but in my view it's long enough. I can't wait to leave Washington with the late afternoon sun shining and the bike still thudding away with no misfire. I'm thrilled to be heading south. This is the moment I've been dreaming of since Boston. I'm now supposedly free of some 500 miles of grey, rain-soaked and often dangerous urban thoroughfares. Even though I've been on Route 1 for a week now, unbelievably I've still got some 1,500 miles to ride till I get to Journey's End in Key West. So far this ride has certainly not been one of the world's greatest motorcycle rides, but it has turned out to be a truly epic adventure. And even though it's driven me to near emotional meltdown, I definitely wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Let's just hope when you join me next time heading to the Carolinas, Georgia, and then on down the whole length of Florida's east coast, the rest of Route 1 will feel that I'm at last, once again, riding the American dream.